Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the British Culture Podcast. I'm joined here today by Sam, as usual. So, how are you doing today, Sam?
Yeah, I'm doing excellent, thank you. How are you doing, James?
I can't complain. Can't complain. Everything's good. Nothing to complain about. And so, the topic of today, I think, is something that a lot of you guys are probably going to be interested in, and that is we're going to talk about football today. More specifically, we're going to try and focus a bit more on English football, or I suppose we could say British football, but we may talk about football generally as well. So let's get into the podcast. Sam, are you a bit of a football fan yourself?
Well, anyone who's a long-standing fan of the channel will know that I am a very big football fan. And as you guys can currently see, I am wearing the scarves of my two football clubs right now, just to prove a point.
And what are the teams on those scarves that you have with you today?
So this one, the blue and white one, is my football team in the UK. It's a team called Reading. We play in the third division of English football, and I have been a fan of Reading since I was 6 years old. The scarf on my other shoulder is my team in Argentina, Club Atletico Huracan. And I've been a fan of Huracan for just under a year now.
Now, strangely, by sheer coincidence, right? By absolute sheer coincidence, I also support the same team, Reading FC. And this is a complete coincidence, and it's mostly because I grew up in near the town of Reading, and I've always supported the football team Reading FC. Reading FC are not a particularly, they're not one of the top teams in the Premiership, right? The Premiership is the top league in British football. Reading is not one of the top teams, but they're also not a bad team. They're kind of a mid-level team. And Sam, I believe they are currently in League 2. Is that Reading's current position?
League 1.
League 1,
which is the third division of English football. It's a little bit confusing. So the first division is known as the Premier League. The second division is known as the Championship. The third division is known as League 1, and the fourth division is League 2.
Yeah, that's right. So it goes to show that Sam is a bigger fan of Reading Football Club than I am. But yeah, so Reading are in League 1, although they were once in the Premiership many years ago. But that is it.
Here's where you're wrong. See, this is just straight away proving that James is not an actual football fan. In lots of places around the world, especially in the UK, you will get asked all the time, who is your football team? What football team do you support? So, lots of people, like James, I'm imagining, just have a team so they can answer that question. Reading have been in the Premier League twice, for a total of 3 seasons.
Yeah, it's true. I when I was younger, I was a big follower of football. Nowadays, it's true, not so much. But yes, the one thing that I am proud of, sort of, is that many people are what we call glory supporters, right? Now, a glory supporter is somebody who just chooses to support whatever team is doing well at the time. So if Chelsea is doing well, they will be a Chelsea supporter. If Manchester City are top of the Premiership, suddenly they're a Man City supporter. And they just hop from team to team to team because they're just glory supporters, and they just follow whichever team is doing well at the time, right? And Sam, do you have any friends who are glory supporters like this?
Yeah, so for me, growing up, the term was always glory hunter. A glory hunter. But it depends what your definition is of glory hunter, because I have lots of friends who are fans of Chelsea, of Arsenal, of Tottenham, big clubs, but I did grow up around those areas. I did grow up, so it's not like they're a Manchester United fan or a Manchester City fan. For me, there's a big split in football. And that is between match-going supporters and what I call armchair supporters. Match-going supporters are the people who actually go to the games. People who go to the stadium every week, they have season tickets, they watch their team home and away. An armchair supporter is someone who supports and watches from their sofa. They have a subscription to Sky TV, and that's it. They've never even come close to the stadium in their lives.
Well, to be honest, Sam, I'm not even an armchair supporter, so I don't know what you would call me. I don't know what's below an armchair supporter. I don't know.
Not bothered is what I would call it.
An I don't care supporter. I vaguely care what happens to Reading, but I'm not really checking. I'm not really up to date with what's happening. Sam, very quickly, what is the other team you have there, and how did you come to support this other team there?
Oh, well, if you would like the full story, there is already a video on the English Sponge website explaining exactly how I became a CA Hurricane supporter. But I'll give you the very quick rundown. When I arrived in Buenos Aires, I decided to go and watch football games at loads of different football stadiums. I love going to new football stadiums. In fact, it's one of my biggest joys in life. And I went to a huge game at the stadium of Club Atlético Huracán. Now this was a derby match, a match against the two biggest rivals. I went and, without knowing, unintentionally, I entered the stadium with the band of Huracán, with their sort of biggest group of most loyal supporters. And it was absolute pandemonium. It was crazy. Something that I had never experienced ever before. And from that day, I fell in love. And now, I take Huracán everywhere I go with me on my skin. I have some football tattoos. One for Huracán, one for Reading.
Nice. Sam, as somebody who does regularly go to football matches, and I assume, Sam, that you go to both the home games and the away games as well, the home games being the games that are played within the hometown, in Reading, for example, and the away games being played in the other locations of the other teams. I assume you go to both home games and away games, and I just want to know, what is it like to be a loyal supporter of a team? What is it like to actually go to the matches and just be like really involved in what's happening, like with all the other fans? What's the atmosphere like? Could you just tell us a bit, specifically with English football as well, if you could tell us a bit?
Yeah, of course. So, for me, one of the biggest things about going to football games is not actually the football itself. I mean, if I were going to football games to enjoy a good quality of football, I would not support Reading. I promise you. We are horrible. But it's about, it's almost like a hobby, right? It's having something that you do every Saturday. You form a community. So back when I was a season ticket holder at Reading, before I, moved out and started doing other things, I had the same seat next to my dad for about 7 years. And everybody in our section had the same seat over multiple years. You really got to know the people around you and form a little community. And the same happened when I went to watch Huracán as well. I made lots of great friends there, people who I still consider friends to this day, I still talk to. And yeah, the atmosphere is great. People are, if you're winning, very happy. There's lots of songs. It's just a good sort of feeling. It's very freeing. It's very liberating, is the best way I can describe it. For 90 minutes, nothing else in the world matters. You have complete disconnect with your phone, with work, with any other issues in your life. For 90 minutes, you are there in the stadium, supporting your team unconditionally. And it's something truly special. It's something I'm sure I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
Something else that is quite common in football as well is something called football hooliganism, right? And basically this is where sometimes at football matches you get some really aggressive fans that, like, during the game or after the game will actually end up like fighting each other outside the stadium or on the streets and so on. So, Sam, I want to know, are you a football hooligan? Do you get drunk and start fights with supporters of the opposite team?
As of right now, I have never had a fight at a football match. In England, I normally go to football matches with my dad. So opportunities to have a scrap, as people call it, with opposition fans are quite limited. Not that I would want to anyways. I do want to make a slight comment, because this idea of football hooliganism, I would say, is very much blown out of proportion. It is not super common, especially in the United Kingdom. In fact, it's very rare. I've been going to football matches in the UK, home and away, for how many years now? 12 years? 10 years? 20 years? Jesus Christ, I'm getting old. Yeah, I've been going to football matches for about 20 years in the UK now. And I can count probably on one hand the amount of times I have seen violence in or around football stadiums. It is not actually about football. It is usually a sign of society as a whole, right? It is just a reflection of the society that we are living in. In fact, I've seen much worse violence at, nightclubs, worse violence at events. The main driver, in my opinion, is alcohol. Copious amounts of alcohol. In the UK, we have big issues with cocaine at football as well. And those things really embolden people. They really embolden people, make them aggressive, and push them into having fights. Like I said, I've experienced it a little bit in England, but not very much. Now, the worst example I have seen of violence in football was actually in Argentina. Like I said, I like to go to lots of different football stadiums, so I went to a game between Independiente de Avellaneda and La U de Chile, Universidad de Chile, or in English, University of Chile. And about halfway through, the game was paused due to violence between the supporters. And things escalated really badly, and about 300 to 400 Independiente supporters broke into the away section, and chaos ensued. There's a lot more to the story than that, but that's the sort of quick rundown of it.
Yeah, it kind of is blown out of proportion. I've never actually experienced any actual football hooliganism when I've been at a game, honestly. So it is blown out of proportion. At the same time, there are some football teams in the UK who do have a really bad reputation for this. The first one that comes to mind is Millwall FC. Now, I don't know if they are still got a bad reputation, Sam, but I remember when I was younger, that was the team you knew that if you were going to play Millwall, that there was going to be issues, basically. Is that still true? Are Millwall still a problem right now?
So they definitely still have a reputation, but like I said before, today, in 2025, 2026 in the UK, violence at football is not very common. At least not in the public view. There are definitely lots of things that go on sort of underground, but those are between sets of supporters who organise fights between them and do it away from the public. Millwall do have a reputation, but because of that reputation, I remember any time Millwall came to town, Millwall came to play away at Reading, the police presence would be tripled. We would see, 3 or 4 times as many police around the stadium, and the big one would be police horses. There would be mounted police officers. In fact, this actually reminds me of a story that I have. The first time I ever witnessed violence at a football match was a game between Reading and Cardiff. Now, Cardiff are another one of these teams who have quite a big reputation. Now, Cardiff scored a goal in the 89th minute to go 1-0 up against Reading. And then, miraculously, in the 93rd minute, the Reading goalkeeper scored to make it 1-1. What followed was a lot of violence between Reading and Cardiff supporters, with many Cardiff supporters spilling out onto the pitch, trying to get over towards the Reading supporters. The difference maker was, however, the mounted police officers. They ran their police horses through massive groups of Cardiff supporters, and that sort of scattered them very quickly and ended the violence in its tracks. Yeah, that was my first experience of violence at a football match.
All right, Sam. So my next question for you is going to be, what do you think is the best football match ever? Like, what is the best football match that you have ever seen in your life? I want to hear your favorite match.
So the best match that I have ever seen, and not just seen, but that I have been to as well, was a game between Reading and Arsenal. Now, this was one of the seasons where Reading were in the Premier League, but this was actually a cup match. And, surprisingly, it is not a game that Reading won. This game was crazy. Within the first 30 minutes, Reading, my small little club from, the small town of Reading, raced to a 4-0 lead against one of Europe's best. One of the best teams in the world. My little club were 4-0 up after about half an hour. It was incredible. People were going crazy. I remember seeing everyone taking pictures of the scoreboard like we could not believe it. And we were thinking, there is no way we could possibly mess this up. Right? And just before half-time, Arsenal scored a goal. They pulled one back. And people around me were laughing. They were like, it's still, 3 goals. It doesn't matter. And I remember my dad looked at me and he went, we've got to be careful here. And I laughed. I was like, what are you talking about, Dad? We're 4-1 up. We can't mess this up, surely. Well, mess this up we did. In the second half, Arsenal pulled it back to 4-4, scoring an equalising goal in the 96th minute. It was absolutely crazy. A little funny anecdote happened. 2 of the Arsenal players forgot that this was a cup game, and they threw their shirts into the crowd before being told that they had 30 more minutes to play. It was very funny watching them go over to the crowd and asking for their shirts back. So, extra time began, and Arsenal scored again to make it 5-4. We then pulled one back to equalise, making it 5-5. Arsenal then scored yet again to make it 6-5. And in the last minutes, just as we were throwing absolutely everything, in England we say throwing the kitchen sink at them, to say throwing everything we can forwards. We were throwing the kitchen sink at them, and then Arsenal counter-attacked and scored a goal in the last minute of play. The game finished Reading 5, Arsenal 7. And despite the fact my team lost that game, it was by far the most insane game of football I have ever watched in my life. And sometimes when I'm bored, I still go back and watch the highlights of that game.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely nuts. Even just the scoreline alone, 7-5, is just ridiculous. Good story. I have a fairly typical favourite game of all time, and it was quite recently, in 2022. And it's the 2022 World Cup final, Argentina versus France. And it being, I believe, one of Messi's last chances to actually win the World Cup. This was such an incredible game, and it just, not only was it a really good game like you were describing with your game, but also the stakes are so incredibly high as well. I mean, it's the World Cup final. You can't get higher stakes than this. And it was such an amazing game. Now, personally, I have a pretty ridiculous story about this. I was watching this game in New York, okay? I was traveling in New York, and I stopped at a bar to watch the game. And it was 2-0 to Argentina. And at that stage, it was about, I believe it was the 75th minute of the game. And Argentina were winning 2-0. And I said, you know what? The game's basically over. And I'm just going to head home. I'm in New York, and I want to see other things. I want to see more tourist things. And so I left the bar. I got on the subway, as they call it in New York. And when I came out the other side of the subway, I checked my phone just to check the score. And then it said 2-2. So France had scored 2 goals in about 3 minutes. And I was like, I can't believe I left the bar. So I tried to race back to get back to the bar, and I actually didn't make it in time. And so I missed the endings of one of the best football games that ever happened. So that was pretty annoying. Having said that, it was one of the best games ever, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember that game very well, of course. What I will say is there is definitely a bit of like misremembering from people about it. And yes, the end of the game was absolutely fantastic, but it was genuinely quite a dull and boring game for about 70 to 75 minutes of it. It seemed very routine, just as finals often are. They're very cagey matches. No team wants to overextend and make a mistake. And yeah, like you said, it almost seemed like a foregone conclusion when Argentina were 2-0 up. But Mbappe did what Mbappe does and brought it back to 2-2. And yeah, the rest of the game was absolutely nuts.
Yeah, that's right. That's why I left, because it seemed like the game was like you said, it was a foregone conclusion. It was over. It was a boring match until that point, so I just left. And that was one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made, leaving that bar on that day. Anyway, Sam, the next question for you, probably the last question of this podcast, is like, obviously football is such a huge part of British culture. So why is it such a big part of our culture? And like, what does football mean to British people? Like, can you just talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So football at its core is exceptionally simple. It is one team against the other, and whoever puts the ball in the goal more times wins. But behind this sort of simplicity, it is ultimately very tactical, very complex, and linked to history and tradition. For match-going supporters in the UK, football is not really about the football. It's not about the game. It's about representing your team. It becomes a part of your identity, part of who you are. Something you would, follow this team around the country or even around the world for. I mean, I've been to so many random towns and cities in the UK that otherwise I would have no reason to go to. And it's all because of football. I have so many incredible memories of going to football matches with my dad. Something that I will have with me for the rest of my life. Even when he is unfortunately no longer with us, I will hold those memories dear to my heart. My favourite thing about English football is not the glitz and glamour of the Premier League. It is the normal, average football team that you have in each town or city. A super interesting fact about British football is every weekend in Britain, more people go to football matches than anywhere else in the world, and it is not even close. The best part, in my opinion, about this is more people in the UK go to football matches in the 3rd division and below than in the top 2 divisions. I mean, teams in England in the 3rd and 4th division pulling crowds of 16,000 people sometimes. I remember last year or 2 years ago, Bradford City were in League 2, so the 4th division of English football. They average 17,000 people a week. That is more than most countries' first divisions. There's something really special about English football, and we follow it in numbers like nowhere else. And for me, that's what it's really about. It's being with your friends, your family, going up and down the country, forgetting about your real life for a couple of hours, just having a great time.
Yeah, something that is cool about English football, and I don't know if this is true for other countries, and it's that the way the leagues work, even the lower leagues, like you can start as like a random club in like the 20th league or something in the country, but it is all connected, so you can eventually, if you keep winning your games, if you keep winning each year, you can get to the Premiership, right? It's like there's no actual barrier for a local team to actually become a Premiership team if they do really, really well. And I also like the fact that we have the FA Cup. And in the FA Cup, you sometimes have these really tiny local sides that nobody has ever heard of playing against like Manchester United, because that's how the FA Cup works. You know, you need to start, everybody is included in the FA Cup. I think that's pretty cool, I would say. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching this episode of the British Culture Podcast. We do actually have more episodes of the British Culture Podcast on our website, englishsponge.com, and you can see the whole series there if you want to watch more episodes like this with me and Sam talking about British culture in depth here. Thank you for watching this video. And Sam, any last things to say here before we finish?
Come on, writing. Dale glow.
Nice. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.